Welcome to today's Sienna webinar with Digital Promise. My name is Anthony Baker, and I'm here with Marika Conrad. And we're going to talk about, once I get my computer moving here, fostering student agency in the engage phase. So welcome. And for today, a little bit about our outcomes. So what we want to be able to do is explore a little bit about student agency and its importance to the CBL process. We want to engage you in some activities to foster agency in the engage phase, and then we want to reflect a little bit about what it all means and how we can use that going forward in our Sienna challenges. So I'm going to take just a minute to talk again about the Sienna Solutions Challenge. So it's a global design challenge. It invites students and teachers to design solutions to real-world problems, and we base this on the challenge-based learning framework. So who can participate in this challenge? We want in-school and out-of-school educators and teachers from anywhere across the globe. We're targeting middle and high school students, so equivalent education levels, ages 11 through 19. And what can students submit? So we're encouraging students to leverage digital tools and technologies in their actions and solutions, creating products or devices, campaigns, physical or digital environments, experiences, a system, or something else. If something really piques their interest or a student's excited, we want to see what they have. And so how will these projects be shared as part of this process? So there is a Sienna Solutions Challenge online gallery. And then we'll also be offering sustainability awards. So eligible educators will be able to apply for a $2,500 US dollar sustainability award for projects that you want to sustain. The deadline for those projects is January 10th, 2022, and you can register at siennachallenge.org. So again, today's webinar is all about fostering student agency in the engage phase. But before we begin, we wanted to just give you a couple of reflective questions. So we want to know what brought you to this particular webinar today. We really want to know, what do you need from us? How can we help? What can we do to support you as you and your students take this work on? So feel free at any time to put a question in the chat, raise your hand, and let us know what we can do to target this to better help you get your job done. So we do have some documents for you. As part of the Sienna Challenge, we have lots of supporting scaffolds for both you and students to make sure that your challenges go smoothly. In particular, this one will be really helpful. It's the facilitator's guide, and we have that in English, Spanish, and French. And so my job here today, before we get to Marika, who's going to engage us in some interesting activities, my job with part of this webinar is to talk about what the engage phase is and talk about why student agency plays an important role in that. So during the engage phase, which is the very first part of the CBL process, what you and your students are doing is you're moving from this abstract thing we call the big idea to a concrete and actionable challenge. And we're going to get there by using the essential questioning process. And that's what Marika is going to walk us through today, a couple of ways that we might be able to get through that essential questioning process. And so the very first step when you're setting up a challenge-based learning unit or project, however you want to refer to it, is to start with this big idea. So the big idea is kind of a broad theme. It's a big concept, and it can be explored in multiple ways. And the real key here is that it's important to you being yourself and your students, and the larger community. So one example of that might be safety, right? So safety is a big, broad concept that can be narrowed down into much more specific things later on. So reflective questions here. So I'm going to follow up on each of my slides with a little bit of a reflective question. So if we think about that, how can we introduce students to a big idea or prompt them to identify on their own in a way that's engaging and allows them to make personal connections? So in the ways I've seen this done, we can start with videos. We can start with field trips. We can start with anything that's going to get students thinking, right? And then we follow up with the essential questioning process and really let them dig down into these big, broad ideas. But there's lots of ways to kind of prompt them. It could just be a reading passage. Nothing is off the table necessarily. What we want is for our students to be engaged and really excited so that we can kind of leverage that engagement to turn it into an interesting solution to a problem that is meaningful. And so after you've got your big idea set up, so in our case, it was safety is the example I'm going to kind of walk through today. Then you want to go through the essential questioning process. And what it does is it allows students to contextualize the big idea and really make it personal to them. So out of this process comes a single essential question, and that it's relevant to the individual and the group, right? So if we think about this big idea of safety, we have to look into our community to figure out why safety matters to us, right? So one example that I've used and I've seen with students in other schools, how can we make it safer for the elderly to live at home? So you might think, well, where do we come up with this essential question? Well, it requires us to kind of figure out what the people in our community need, right? So that's an example of an essential question. So my question to you, our attendees today, would be, how can we encourage students to look into their community for problems to be solved? How do we get from that big idea, which was safety, to where we are here with this essential question? How can we make it safer for the elderly to live at home? Feel free to put something in the chat if you have an idea about how you might do this. Marika, I don't know if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, one thing I've seen that has been a great experience for students is to talk to community members. So if we're focused specifically on the elderly, or we think that that's a safety need, but we don't really know what it is, going out and interviewing some community members who are in that age category, because most of our students, they're 11 to 19, they've never been elderly. So being able to talk to a grandparent or a community member could be a really important way for them to start understanding, well, what is important when it comes to safety for the elderly?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is that you don't know what your community needs until you actually talk to them, right? So it's worth getting out there and doing some sort of survey, whether that's just chatting with people or whether it's doing something more complicated. It's really going to depend on your community and what their needs are. And so once we get to an essential question, in this case, our big idea is safety, and then our essential question is, how can we make sure that senior citizens are able to safely live at home? We need to turn that into a call to action, right? So the next step for what we're doing is actually turning it into the challenge, and that's where we're trying to get. So we want to prompt students with the big idea. We want them to question and to make personal connections to it. And eventually what we want to get to is this idea of the challenge, the problem that we're actually trying to solve. So a couple of key things to know about challenges is that, one, they are immediate, which means they're not things that can be done in 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? They're things that we can solve right now, and that they're actionable, which means I, as a student, can take action on this thing. So if our challenges are so technologically advanced that I have no opportunity to actually act on it, that's not a challenge that's going to make for a good project for our students, right? So we want to make sure that the kids can act on these things. So one example, using this kind of safety example we've talked about. So students identify, we talk about safety, students hear from their community that we have lots of elderly who don't feel safe in their homes, and they're maybe having to move in with other people or move into nursing homes, long-term care. One challenge there might be, how can we assist seniors in managing the most common dangers of their home? So we want to make it really specific. So in this case, this is something immediate that we can do as students, we have agency over, that we can do to help our community. So it's actionable. None of these things are so complex that we don't have the bandwidth or time or skills to complete them. And we can walk right out into the world and make them happen. So that's what we're looking for. So my question again to everybody who's attending today is, how do we get from that essential question, and our essential question in this case was, how can we make it safer for the elderly to live at home? And how do we turn that into a challenge? Feel free to add something in the chat if you're interested. But one way to do this in a simple way is just to turn it into a directive, right? So if our essential question is, how can we make it safer for the elderly to live at home? The way to turn that into a challenge, the simple way, is just to say, make it safer for the elderly to live at home. That's one way to do it. But it also helps to wordsmith a bit and maybe dig into more specificity. And so the other question is, how do we know when a challenge is eligible, or a challenge is actionable, rather, but not yet a solution? So that's the other thing we want to avoid. We want to make sure that what we're not jumping to are solutions. And so in this case, what we don't want our challenge to be is we don't want our challenge to be create a checklist for the elderly to ensure they have a safe home. That's not a challenge. That is a solution to a challenge. So we want to make sure the challenge is has multiple solutions to it, multiple ways to accomplish that. So if we look back at this this potential challenge, assist seniors in managing the most common dangers of their home, there are lots of ways to accomplish that. And so in a classroom, you might have the entire class working on one idea. You might have the class working on 3 or 4 different potential solutions to this challenge. So what we don't want to do is go to the solution too soon. We want to stay in the question and stay in the challenge. So I'm going to pause there for just a minute and give folks an opportunity to ask any questions they have about the engage phase. That was a pretty quick overview about what happens there. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like and ask a question, put something in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to move on and I want to talk about student agency. So today's webinar is about that student agency portion and why it's so important in the engage phase. So one of the real keys to challenge-based learning and the challenge-based learning cycle is to maximize that agency where possible. And why we want to do that is because it leads to increased engagement, for one. So our students are going to be far more engaged when they feel like they have some control over the situation and over the direction of their learning. You're going to get more relevant community-oriented challenges. So for students, it's an opportunity for them to identify what is important in their community by talking to the folks in their community, as opposed to saying a project-based learning situation where you say, here is the solution I want you to develop. It provides students an opportunity to actually figure out what's important to them as learners and build that thing. So in that way, you're going to end up with some higher quality solutions, and it's going to be a more meaningful experience overall for students when they have some agency and some decision-making power. And so if we're looking for what are the hallmarks of these learning experiences that focus on student agency, one of them is that you're going to provide opportunities for students to make decisions about the direction of their learning. So the students themselves are going to have some say. They are going to be put in a facilitation and a partnership role with you. So you are going to be a co-learner with your students. And what that does is give them the opportunity to say, I think this is important and I'd like to learn about this thing. The other thing that you can find in learning experiences that focus on student agency are opportunities in room for students to share things like their feelings and their experiences and to bring their funds of knowledge to bear. Right. And so when we say funds of knowledge, what we're really referencing here is that we know each student is a combination of multiple things, right? They have different parents and different home lives. They have different cultural practices, right? They learn differently. And so what we want to do is provide them opportunities to share those things because they're all going to learn or have different perspectives. And we want them to bring those funds of knowledge into the conversation with everyone else. And so these learning experiences, what they also do is they encourage students to make personal connections to the material. So it's not just, I need to solve this problem because my teacher said it's important. It's, I know the people who this affects, and I understand how this is going to help their lives improve, right? And that makes for a far more meaningful and powerful learning experience for students than just assigning them to build a water filter, right? We want to make sure that they can make a personal connection. They can see the people that they're helping and understand why it's important to them. And so there are academic benefits to student agency and learning, but I think there's also some non-academic, some social benefits that get overlooked a lot for student agency. We know students are going to be more engaged in the classroom when you increase the agency, but it turns out that there's social benefits as well, right? And so the OECD is going to release a report, Education 2030, sometime soon. And one of the big sections in there is about student agency. And one of the things that it says student agency allows people to do is it allows them to overcome adversity, right? So feeling like you have agency and the ability to make a difference and make decisions allows you to react more favorably when adverse events happen to you. And so we want to encourage that, right? And so this Leadbeater citation as well is really interesting to me, because it says that when you give students the opportunity to experience agency in the learning, what it does is it helps them do a couple different kinds of things in the world. One of them is to prepares them for moral agency, right? So moral agency means I recognize the rights of others and myself. And then there's societal agency, this idea that they understand that they have a responsibility to society, right? And that society has a responsibility to them, and that there's an interaction there, and they can understand and navigate. They can navigate that a little bit better when they have agency-oriented learning experiences earlier in life. And then the last kind of agency that they identify is this creative agency, where they have the agency to add new value to the world, whether that's economic value or learning, philosophy, right? Or art. So they have not just creativity, but they can add value to the world and understand that the things that they do are actually valuable to the world around them and to their community. So I think those are some of the non-academic benefits that you can get from engaging students in agentic learning experiences, particularly through challenge-based learning. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marika, and she's going to talk to us about the essential questioning process and some of the ways that we engage students in the Engage phase.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anthony. So as Anthony was talking about, you start with a big idea, and once students have a big idea, it's time for them to really explore and learn more about it before they can write an essential question, to learn about their community and how that big idea is affecting them. And so to support students as they're introduced to the big idea and to explore it, we've developed a series of Engage activities. And these activities can help students as they learn about their big idea and really move into that essential questioning. And so we have 5 different types of Engage activities: discuss, notice, empathize, connect, and define. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what each of those are. Next slide, please, Anthony. So I want to point out, we have what's called the Challenge Builder, and the Challenge Builder is a resource for you and your students as you move through the challenge to be able to develop your ideas and keep track of what's going on. And so on the Challenge Builder, you'll notice that there are places to plan one or more of these activities for your students, and for them to plan for themselves as well. And they're all 5 on here, but I do want to say you do not need to, and probably will not have time to do every type of activity for every challenge. It's really about picking the activities and the interactions that make the most sense for your students and for the challenge that you're doing. And so let's talk a little bit more about what each of these are. On the next slide, we've got discuss activities. So discuss activities invite students to talk about the big idea, to think about how it relates to them and what they already know. And so this could be through an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals. In the spring, we had some teachers pilot the challenge, and they had a lot of success with introducing students to those development goals and having the students select goals that really meant something and resonated with them. It could also be a pre-selected big idea if there's something that fits in that aligns with your curriculum, and you want to kind of give a big idea and then have students dig down into what essential questions and how does that connect to your community. That's another way to do it. And so the discuss gives you the opportunity to maybe watch a video or have a conversation with students to talk about their prior experiences or their knowledge. And that discussion can really provide students with the opportunity to define the challenge themselves and to connect to their own why behind that big idea. Another option for activities are notice activities. Notice activities are a time for students to observe the big idea within their community and to consider their own personal beliefs and relationships and how that connects to the big idea, or to grapple with the larger social and political systems that are affecting the big idea. So these are really 3 different scales, either themselves, their community, or much larger than that, political and social structures on which they can notice how this big idea is affecting the community. The third type is empathize. And so empathize activities are really a chance for students to talk to community members, like I suggested earlier, and to learn more about their experiences with the big idea. And this is especially important when students can get a better understanding of how a big idea affects other community members who experience it differently than themselves. And so making sure that they can empathize with and think through how that big idea is affecting others in the community. The fourth type is connect. And so connect activities are an opportunity for students to learn more about what others are doing for their big idea. And this could be organizations, it could be individuals, it could be in your community or globally, but really it's about making connections. And if you can, making partnerships. So ideally students can forge those partnerships with organizations from their community who are undertaking the same work or similar work to their big idea, and then can connect their ideas to what the community members are already doing. And finally, we have define activities. So define activities really allow students to consider the parts of a big idea and break down that idea to think about how different factors are contributing to it. In define activities, students can identify causes and then even deeper root causes to really think about how they can more effectively design their investigate activities and their action concepts based on these causes and root causes to get as deep as they can go as a group. So those are the 5 types. And for each engage activity, we encourage reflection and documentation of ideas. So we have 2 different resources to help with that. The first is an engage activity synthesis. And these are both from the Student Challenge Organizer. And that activity synthesis is meant to be done really quickly after each engage activity that students do, just to document their ideas and get them thinking. And then the engage phase synthesis happens at the end of the engage phase and is an opportunity to take those individual syntheses and connect them together and really think about what did this phase mean as they move into the investigate phase. And all of these things I've been talking about are on the Siena Challenge Resource Library. So on that library, we have a variety of engage activities as well as other resources that are already developed for your students. And while we recognize that we could not develop every engage activity, there are certainly ones that we don't have a resource for. These are a starting place for you if they're helpful to you and your students. On that resource library, you'll notice that on the left side, there are a set of filters. The library includes exactly the same materials in French, Spanish, and English. So if that's helpful to your, depending on what language is your students' first language, you're welcome to use any of those resources. They're all translations that mirror each other. But because we have 3 languages in there, we recommend using those filters that are on the left side to filter by language. You can filter by challenge phase or activity type. So you could look specifically for engage activities to help you identify the resources that'll specifically help you. And so I want to show you an example really quickly, and then we're going to do an activity together. So one example of how engage activities can be used is found on this environmental impact of cities example challenge builder. And so this challenge builder kind of walks through one possible way to do a challenge. And it includes 3 different engage activities: a discuss, a notice, and a define. And so today I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to try out the notice activity. So this activity is based on the noticing journal engage activity that we have in the resource library. And all of these resources, all these engage activity resources are meant to be student facing. And so we're all going to put on our student hats. And what I want you to do is read through those instructions about keeping a noticing journal, and then on a blank document or a piece of scrap paper, whatever's kind of around, spend a couple minutes noticing the environmental impact of your city or community. I know you can't walk around right now because we're on a webinar together, but look out the window. Think about last time you were walking around town. What do you notice as you think back onto those opportunities? What do you notice as you think about your school, about what does lunchtime look like? What does passing periods look like? Whatever it might be. And so take a little bit to journal, to write down what you think. And then based on your noticing, brainstorm an essential question. So where could this big idea of environmental impact of cities go to be a specific central question for you? If you already have a big idea in mind for your challenge with your students, you're also welcome to use that as the big idea, but I wanted to throw one out that we could use together as well. So I'm going to give us a couple minutes. Anthony and I are going to stop talking and just let you notice a little bit. But if you can give a thumbs up or a signal in chat when you've had a couple minutes to think, that would be great. Or feel free to come on to video and we'll have a little conversation together. It's been 3 or 4 minutes. Are we good? Does anyone need more time, less time? So I want to invite people to share kind of if there are things you were noticing about. So as I was sitting here, I was thinking, I live in an apartment building, kind of a pretty urban downtown area. And so I was thinking about the effects of all the asphalt and concrete and what that does. It's a rainy day today. So what that does for stormwater runoff and where that water can go. And so that kind of how that impacts our community. Does anyone else have other noticings or things they were thinking about their communities?
I can share. So in my community, we recently had a highway made wider and moved. So it's a state highway, and they moved it, I don't know, probably almost a mile away from its old location. But in doing so and updating it, they increased the speed limit. So the sound is much louder of the vehicles. So I wonder, as an environmental impact, I'm just noticing, right, that I hear cars traveling at higher speeds far more than I used to, even when the road was closer to where we were.
So these noticings can lead you to an essential question. So our next slide is, what essential questions did we come up with that are specific to our communities? Does anyone want to share in the chat or out loud what your essential question was?
Well, I think my essential question, if you don't mind me chiming in,
Yeah, go for it.
be something like, how can we reduce the impacts of noise on the environment?
Mhm. Yeah, on the example challenge builder, the question was, what is the environmental impact of our city and what features of our city are causing the greatest environmental impact? So that one's still pretty broad. One that I was thinking about was, how can our community limit urban flooding? So thinking about that, the phenomenon of urban flooding. I've also been doing a lot of hiking nearby, and we're right on the Patuxent River. And so what's the impact of our community on the Patuxent River, and how can we decrease that impact? So thinking specifically about one ecosystem, and it's part of the Anacostia watershed. So thinking about kind of how those things go together. I'll give a couple more seconds if anyone wants to share an essential question. Okay. On the next slide, we've got a couple reflection questions that I just encourage you to be thinking about. So what type of engage activities would you use with your students? Would you have a discussion? Would you do some noticing? Would you connect, define, empathize? What is the thing that would be helpful for your students? And talk to them about it too after. Think about, to them, what's the thing that would help them learn more? And then think about, are there engage activities that we already have in the library, ready-made for you, but they're Google Docs, so they're editable. So are there any engage activities that you think would resonate with your team and with the challenge that you're currently working on? So I invite you to reflect on those questions, to think about that. Anthony shared while I was talking in the chat the link to the Siena Resource Library. We encourage you to make an account on sienachallenge.org. If you do, you'll be able to favorite those library entries. So if you find ones you like, you can favorite them and they'll save right to your dashboard. But you can see the resource library whether or not you have an account. So if you want to just kind of wade in, you can check out that resource library, but I highly encourage you to create an account and stay connected. And so we have a couple next steps coming up. We have an educator meetup on October 12th. That'll be at noon Eastern time, so the exact same time as this webinar was. Our next webinar, Anthony and I are going to do a repeat performance, but this time talking about the investigate phase. And so we'll be here on October 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, talking about supporting students as they investigate their challenge. And we're really excited to have a co-host from Siena, who's going to be joining us for that webinar. And the last big event we have coming up this month is a Twitter chat with Sarah Thomas. She's an educator and the founder of EduMatch. And so that'll be on October 26th. And that'll be on the Digital Promise Twitter. So we hope to see you in any of these opportunities coming up. Anthony and I are going to stick around if you have any questions, and we would love to answer them. If you want to talk through your specific challenge, we're happy to chat through with you what things could look like and how you can engage your students. Anthony, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, other than I learned that the Twitter chat will be at 7 p.m. Eastern. So there's that to add. And otherwise, I just want to say thank you for attending today. And thanks for giving us an opportunity to bring some information to you, and excited to see what kind of interesting things you do with your students. So with that, we will sign off for today unless you'd like to hang out and chat. All right, well, with that in
Thank you
mind,
so much.
yeah, we'll say goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye. Thanks for coming.